We're going to talk a little bit about something that's a great tradition, the Little Brown Jug, because of course, October 24th is our homecoming date and was supposed to be the homecoming date for the university. And now we're playing Minnesota on the road. So let's talk about the Little Brown Jug. First, I'm Bruce Madej. I'm the longest serving SID in the University of Michigan history. Basically, that means I was the PR guy. I did serve as associate athletic director up until 2014 and love the university as we all do. Next, I'm going to introduce John Bacon. Most of you probably have heard of John. John is a best-selling author. He's a public speaker. He has been a lecturer at the university, an adjunct professor, has even won Professor of the Year, the Apple Award. John has done a great job with that. Just an outstanding historical knowledge individual who has great stories and can really put things into perspective. Greg Dooley. Greg Dooley is with mvictors.com. And if you have not been to mvictors.com and you love Michigan tradition, you need to go there. mvictors.com will tell you about everything from the old Union buttons to the Little Brown Jug stories more in depth to the different types of uniforms that have been used by the University of Michigan football team. And Greg is going to provide us with probably the most deep down hard fact pieces about the history of the Little Brown Jug. And then we come to John Falk. Over 40 years in the locker room with the University of Michigan. He came as the equipment manager under Bo Schembechler when Bo came from Miami of Ohio. He came 1 year later. And John is, if he isn't the greatest storyteller, he is one of the best. This guy can really tell you some great stories. He's a good guy to talk to, and I think tonight we're going to have a little bit of fun about this. So first we're going to start off, I think, with the historical aspect of everything. And I'm going to start off with Greg. Greg, you know, you were the one who literally took the Little Brown Jug and told the story that probably was not the type of story we all knew, but it was really the first time anything was ever put in writing and put it into context about what is the Little Brown Jug, how did it start, where did it go, when did it get lost, when did it get found, and is this the real Little Brown Jug we're talking about?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So again, this is Greg Dooley, and I think if you want to start from the beginning, what you have is this is the early days of the Big Ten, which was founded in the mid 1890s, and there are really four big teams that are powers back then. It's Chicago, who's no longer in the Big Ten. You got Wisconsin, and then you have these two teams that we're talking about, Minnesota and Michigan. And basically, this guy, Fielding Yost, who a lot of Michigan people know, arrives in 1901, and he blows everybody's doors off, right? He wins every game. He's unscored upon. And he does the same thing in 1902. And then leading up to 1903, we have a game against Minnesota that's scheduled in the middle of the season. Now, up to this point, both teams are unbeaten and unscored upon, just like Yost did back in 1901. And this is billed as the game of the century. Now, they did that a little bit. They didn't have Netflix. They didn't have a lot of entertainment. So they did build up. This, by any stretch, was the biggest game that had been played in many, many years in what they called the West, right? Which was where effectively the Midwest back in the day. So they meet on October 31st, 1903. Betting is going on, ticket scalping, all kinds of stuff. It's a hugely hotly contested battle. The Michigan scores in the second half, and Minnesota adds a late touchdown very late in the game, and the fans storm the field. The game ends in a 6-6 tie. It's the first time that Fielding H. Yost, since he arrived, came away without a win in a game. The legend goes is that in the haste to leave the field, Michigan left this prized water jug, which was bought before the game. It's a stoneware crock, 5 gallons, to hold water. They didn't have Gatorade water jugs back then, so they typically supplied or had these things in the sideline. Michigan left the jug behind. Some say it was a strategy of Yost to make sure that Minnesota didn't mess with his water, so he bought his own jug. But for whatever reason, it was left there. It was found a day or two later, most sources think Monday morning, by a guy named Oscar Munson, who found it. He brought it to the athletic director from Minnesota, and he told him in his thick Scandinavian accent that Yost left his jug. And what they did with that was they painted it up, and I have a kind of a replica here. Now this is small, but they basically painted it Michigan Jug on one side, captured by Oscar, with the score of the game, which was 6-6, with a big giant 6 on the Minnesota side of the jug. And what happened next is where you get a lot of myths, right? Some people say, well, Yost wanted that back.
Let me say one thing. Let me ask John this, but John, why did Yost want his own jug at that game?
Well, you couldn't trust Minnesota.
That's right.
But again, when you take a look at it, you had a situation where, and I'll get this to John Bakes. Did he trust Minnesota, as John pointed out? That's why he brought his own jug, wasn't it?
No, Falk got it right. He bought the jug for what, 50 cents, I believe.
I think it was closer to 30, but
30 cents. Okay,
yeah.
Got it in my notes here somewhere. Yeah, in fact, all centered around a 30-cent water vessel. I can write this stuff but not remember it. That's the rule. 30 cents. He bought it not too far outside of Minneapolis on the way to the game, of course. And he was paranoid, of course. And he had reason to be. And by the way, most of the great coaches are paranoid. Falk, how paranoid was Bo about Woody, for crying out loud? Yeah, paranoia runs through this rivalry here. And it's worth pointing out, by the way, before you dive back into the Greg stuff, there are 102 rivalry trophies out there right now for college teams. This is one of the great things about college football. The oldest, longest running one is the Brown Jug, not the first, as Greg will tell you, the longest running one. And the fun thing for me is that the jug was neither little nor brown. It's a 5-gallon jug. It's big, and it's pink putty jug at first, of course. So why is it called that? Because of an 1869 song by Joseph Winter called Little Brown Jug. And decide for yourself what these lyrics mean. Me and my wife live all alone in a little log cabin we call our own. She loves gin and I love rum. And don't we have a lot of fun? Ha, 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 you and me. Little brown jug, don't I love thee? The guys are drunk, okay? And I put too fine a point on it. And that song is why it's called the Little Brown Jug. It makes no sense otherwise. And, of course, I'll let Greg take it from there, but it is the best of the batch.
Yeah, so especially back then. I mean, when you bought these stoneware jugs, which was most like a Red Wing jug, which are popular collectibles today. Yeah, it's pale. It's got a pinkish hue to it. And even when they first had it, they whitewashed it white. So it was neither brown nor little. It's 5 gallons.
So after that game, and now Oscar Munson has it, what was told to Yost how he had to get it back?
So the legend goes that Yost somehow knew about this 30-cent jug, right? And that they went home without it, and Minnesota had it. Now, what Minnesota did with it was they actually kept it as a souvenir, and the athletic director hung it in his office. There's a great picture, and it hung up there. But the word got back to Yost that they kept this prize, and it was their water jug. And again, I hate to say it, the legend goes, Yost said, "Hey, I want my jug back," and the response was flatly, "Well, why don't you win it back?" Right? There isn't a lot of evidence that that's actually how it went down. There's a lot of questions there. Why would Yost care about a 30-cent jug? How were they going to get it back? They weren't on the schedule again, so when were they going to win it? There's a lot of questions there. It's a fun story. But either way, it was absolutely something that was prized by Minnesota, and again, hung in the athletic director's office as a prize, all painted up.
John Bakes, I'm talking to this time. When you take a look at something like that, what is that is that a plan to try to get everybody fired up? Is that something that you think Yost tried to do to take this rivalry to the next step?
Well, what Greg Dooley's research, and he is the foremost jugologist, it must be said right now. And Johnny Falk knows a lot about it. I've read a lot about it, written a lot about it. So have you, Bruce. But we all bought the myth about the letter and come back and win it. it turns out, as Greg has discovered more than any of us, that these guys are great marketers. And like Muhammad Ali and Frazier, of course, they realize that if they pump this thing up, the game's going to matter that much more. Not that the game needed much pumping up. And they play again, not until 1909. And I could not believe this, Bruce, when I was researching this, Yost, in 1995, because I grew up here and I read all the history and so on. Michigan left the Big Ten from 1905 to 1906, that is, to 1917. And I couldn't believe it. And I had to get confirmation, and it's true. So when Michigan plays Minnesota in 1909, and thanks to a rule Amos Alonzo Stagg called, and I'm not making this up, the non-intercourse rule. Look that one up, kid. It does not mean what you think it means. Right? It means you can't play teams outside the Big Ten. That's how Stagg was trying to shut out Yost, keep Michigan out forever because they kept on beating up on Chicago, of course. So in 1909, this game had already been scheduled, so it was allowed to be grandfathered in, basically. So now the question is, the Michigan, the former kings of the Big Ten, nonstop for 5 years, are they really all that or not? In the meantime, Minnesota is the team you got to beat, and it's headed for a great game up in Minneapolis. The Gandy Dancer, what we then called, of course, the Ann Arbor train station, they posted scores with each play, basically. The Barker up there on a stage to all the fans clustered around the train station to get the word from Minneapolis as to what the game was doing. So, Greg, take it from there.
Yeah, so Bruce, at this point, this isn't a trophy, right? It's a prize. Maybe Yost wanted it, maybe not. I don't think so. But it's hanging in Doc Cook's athletic office at the athletic director at the time. And what it seems to have happened is that before the game, he gave a speech. This is another big game. This is the first time they're facing Michigan since this brutal 1903 tie, the game of the century. And he takes it down. He has a discussion with his captain, John McGovern, and they decide, hey, wouldn't it be cool if the winner got to take the jug home? And it's 1909 that really establishes that first time that it's a trophy. I don't know that they said, hey, we're going to play for it forever and we're going to paint tiny scores on it or any of that kind of stuff yet. But that's really where they decide to have the winner take the game. And of course, Michigan wins that game in 1909 and takes the jug back to Ann Arbor for the first time. So really the first time they ever actually played for this prize was 1909. And as John mentioned, it's not technically the oldest trophy, but what it did was it's the longest continuously played for trophy. And obviously more than 100 times over, it's been copied as a concept for college football teams. And it's a huge, huge part. Just look at the Big Ten of college football tradition.
Yeah, and Bakes, talk about that tradition, what that means to college football, what that means to Michigan football.
What college football has more than any other sport in America and maybe globally, by far the most tradition of any sport in the world. And tradition that people care about, they bring it forward. Notre Dame, of course, USC's got theirs, Alabama, Ohio State, of course. These traditions are a huge part of it. It's based on identity, how you're attached to these universities, loyalty. When Michigan fans, we'll have 60 countries here tonight. When Michigan fans move away, they become more loyal, not less loyal. So that's part of the equation as well. And then, of course, the rivalries can't be beat. And to give you a little notion there, as Greg pointed out, there are 102 trophies that followed the Brown Jug. And these include 7 bells, 4 buckets, 2 spittoons, beer barrels, bourbon buckets, peace pipes, and even a shot glass. Where the hell do you engrave your name on a shot glass? That's my question. And incredibly, Montana and Montana State, they played the Brawl in the Wild. This is the most testosterone of all the possible rivalries. And what do they play for? An oil painting. What the hell?
hey, John Falk. Okay, John Falk. We play for Paul Bunyan, right?
Exactly right. I wonder when you're going to bring that up. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And that one's got some interesting facts. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but we'll stick with the Little Brown Jug. When I get to John, we can talk a little bit about the traditional trophies on that. So we get through we're in the early 1900s, but the jug doesn't just have a history of its own on the field. The jug has its own history, period. Right, Greg?
Well, yeah. So there's a lot of things, right? So I showed you kind of how it looks, and there's photos of how it originally looked. And of course, the next couple times they played for it, they tried to paint the scores on. And I think at some point someone realized, hey, we might be doing this for a while. So then they really changed how it looked in the 20s, right? But so there's that. There's the different paint jobs of it. But there was a thing, you know, and you've heard of like the Ivy League schools and the military academies kind of stealing mascots. Well, for a while there started to be a thing about stealing game trophies and trophies like this. So in fact, this jug disappeared from the administration building, which I believe is like the ticket office today, right there on State Street.
Yes, it is.
Before the game in 1932. All right. Now, this is a big game. Michigan, turns out, won the national championship that year. But the jug disappeared, and a jug showed up at a gas station, which is now the Bear Claw Coffee at the split of Washtenaw and Stadium. A freshly painted jug, very suspiciously showed up before the game, and was kind of mocked by the media. So, but it was proven that really wasn't the brown jug, and we know that because the real jug showed up a couple years later in Ann Arbor before the 1933 game. So yeah, some funny stories there. And by the way, I think I screwed up. I think it was 1931 when it disappeared and showed back up in 1933. So sorry about the years there. But for 2 years, as far as we know, the actual Little Brown Jug was missing and showed back up in 1933. Now, is that the real jug? Did it make it through that little period? That's a different question.
Well, that's the big question. And John Falk, I got a question for you on that, because you've been hosting that jug and holding it. So you and Greg did a few things to take a look at it. When you first had the first John Falk, I'm talking to you there, John.
I got you. I didn't get my dog. I didn't get my dogs.
Well, let's go to bacon. You get the dog. I'll get to bacon.
I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I got to get a battery.
We'll be back with John Falk in a second. For those watching, this is normal. Okay.
Yeah. Bruce, I think I can field that one if you'd like.
That's just
the real one. Yeah. So, John,
but I'd like to get John in as you talk about it, how the whole process went. I'll talk to John Bacon right now, because when you take a look at these traditions and at the jugs, Minnesota was a good football team, basically up and through the 40s and early 50s. Talk about how Minnesota, because I want to talk about how they really, it changed a little bit, the jug and the importance of the jug, maybe not being as big as it once was for a period of time. But back when Minnesota was good, it was huge.
Minnesota won 9 straight years, by the way, from 1934, as Greg pointed out, until 1943. So even the great Tom Harmon never won the jug, incredibly, and 3 whacks for him, of course. So they were national champions in the 30s, and the first coach in the 30s was a guy named Fritz Kreisler. Perhaps you've heard of him. Then, of course, Princeton came calling for him, the first non-alumnus to coach at Princeton. And then Michigan got him back in 1938-39 by offering him a ton of money and basically rolling out the red carpet. So it's one of the first times an Ivy League coach went to the Big Ten. At that point, that represents a real power shift from the East Coast to the Midwest, from the private schools, the Ivies, to the Big Ten. And now the locus of power in college football is not the Big Three, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. It's Michigan, it's Minnesota, it's teams like that. But that starts in the 30s. And now the brown jug, I'm sure Greg would agree, really takes on a lot of importance when you finally start getting it back in the 40s.
Yeah, like people talk about different schools having dominance and Michigan's dominance in this series, which is absolutely true, but no team beat Michigan historically like Minnesota beat Michigan in that 9-year stretch that Bacon brought up. And I think Minnesota claims 5 national championships during that stretch. And keep in mind, as I mentioned, Michigan won 2 national championships before that. So these teams were powerhouses. So you talk about the significance of this game. It was huge. And that game, you mentioned Tom Harmon, that was the only thing stopping Michigan from winning a national championship, let alone a league championship in 1940, was a brutally contested game in the slop up in Minnesota.
So John Bacon, when you see this type, you take a look at the history. I mean, do you think that the history of the jug has gone from kind of interesting right off the bat, kind of fun, using it as a marketing tool, to really becoming important in the 30s and the 40s? Or was there a time period back when the jug was missing, when it was taken? When do you think the jug became important, Bakes?
I think from the get-go, as Greg points out, the 1909 game was a nationally important game. It wouldn't nationally televised if they had television back then, no radio even. But 1909 is when it certainly is on the national stage. All the copycats start shortly thereafter. So a ton of trophies get created in the 1910s, 1920s. But as far as the rivalry goes, okay, it's great to have, this thing you guys pass back and forth. It barely passed back and forth from the early going. 1919, Minnesota wins. 1927, Minnesota wins, and that's about it. So it's all Michigan until Minnesota goes on a streak. And that from that point on until probably the 70s and 80s, no one at Michigan took that trophy for granted. And of course, in the 60s, they also had a resurrection too. They won a national title with Joe Salem as the quarterback. They won the Brown Jug during that stretch 4 straight times. So at various points, it's been important. But at that point, it's a pretty good actual rivalry. Whereas, frankly, in the 70s and 80s, when John Falk handles the Brown Jug, is more of a novelty than it was a rivalry, I would say.
So, Greg, now we're talking about, the jug being missed. You talked about the great games in the 1930s and the 1940s. And, now in the 1950s, Michigan really wasn't playing for any other trophies at that time, were they, in the 40s?
No, not quite yet. Again, the next one I think is established in the early 50s, which is the Paul Bunyan Trophy. Yeah.
So the trophy comes in, and people don't know if it's real. Talk a little bit about the trophy itself and what you and John Falk did to try to find out what was going on. Is this indeed the real Brown Jug? Is this the real one we have right now?
Sure.
This is great, people. This is great. Go, Greg, go.
This is scary. Okay, so yes, thanks to John Falk, got a hard look at it, and I actually drew in the master potter from the Henry Ford Museum, which is an expert in this period, to personally inspect the jug, to look at photos of the jug. He believes, based on some markings on the jug, this is authentic. There is also, today, there is underneath the Minnesota M, you can see the outline underneath the paint of an old style Minnesota M that dates to the 20s, okay? You ask living and from both sides, Dick Mattson, John Falk, some of the predecessors, they all say, passed on from generation to equipment manager, that it's real. There are news snippets, and there's word even from Oscar himself that at one point it was cracked or broken, but maybe repaired. So there's a lot of information. My take is it has a very, very good chance of surviving all this time, but it at least dates to the 20s. And if they faked it, they did a really good job. They made a lot of these jugs, but the handle, which is the potter's expert take, says it's spot on from that original 1903 jug.
Hey, John Falk, when Greg approached you to take a look at this and, and take it to, the Henry Ford, what were you thinking? Did you think Greg might have been a little bit of one of these crazies that's been kind of following athletics for a while? What was your thoughts?
No, I thought it was great.
Crazy here.
I thought it was great. I thought it was really nice that we were going to be able to find out if it was the true Little Brown Jug, because we've all heard the stories, and Greg was really great taking it, studying it, and he even showed me the outline of that old block Minnesota M in there. So from my point of view, I'm going to say it's authentic.
I would expect nothing else from you, John Falk. I would be guaranteed.
Think about this for a second, Bruce. In other words,
what'd you say, Bakes?
if you think about this, though, what Greg and Falk have done, bringing in the what is the guy called?
And I should
grammatologist.
It's Ryan Forey, and he was the master potter from the Henry Ford Museum. The Henry Ford. Yep.
Well, I think Bakes, you have to really think this is something. I mean, you're a journalist. This was taking a piece of history, taking a tradition of Michigan, and going in and finding out what it's all about.
Oh, it's brilliant. Great work by both these guys, of course. And think about this for a second. If it does go back, in fact, in 1903, and it looks as though it does, near as we can figure, think about this. How many sweaty hands, all taped up with dirt and so on and mud, plenty of rainy games in this series because it's often played in October, have handled that jug, put it over their heads, and I hate to say this out loud because I'm afraid of jinxing it, and no one has dropped the damn thing.
Two hands.
Two hands.
Johnny's seen it, though. A few times they grab it by one hand. Now, of course, in the 70s and 80s, Michigan's only lost the game 4 times in 45 years. From 1968 to 2013, only 4 losses. But I would argue, Bruce, those 4 losses are 4 of the most painful losses in Michigan history. And I bet you and Falk would agree with me on that one. That is, of course, 77. Michigan's number 1 in the country. They're shut out in Minnesota. The rain game, quote unquote. You guys can talk about that one.
Oh, John, we're going to talk about that.
Might as well do it right now. Go ahead.
Okay.
Dive in.
John, talk about that 77 game.
Well, first of all, I think we better review this. I came here in 1974, and the first thing I did when I walked into Bo Schembechler's office, my first thing in the job, he said, "Now, Falk, you're in charge of 3 trophies: the Little Brown Jug, the Paul Bunyan Trophy, and the Big Ten Championship Trophy." And he said, "That's your job, and your job is to take care of those." So that Little Brown Jug was interesting because I remember in 1977, we went there, and Friday before the game, it was a beautiful 75-degree day. The sun was out, and everything was nice. The field was in great shape. And Bo come over to me, and he says, "Falk, the ground screw man is going to water down the field, but then they're going to suck it out, and it'll be nice and dry for tomorrow." And I said, "Bo, they don't have a suck machine here. This is just a regular grass field." And Bo looked at me, took his index finger, of course, how you spread your ribs, and he says, "Falk, if they tell me it's going to get sucked out, it's going to get sucked out." So I got to the ballpark the next morning. Now, understand, we were number 1 in the country, and we had Butch Woolfolk. We ran to the outside. That's where our strongest was. Minnesota had these big burly guys inside on defense. You don't run up the middle on Minnesota in this game. So when I got there at 6:30 in the morning, water is running off the field onto the track. They left the sprinklers on all night long. I called Giel, who was the athletic director of Minnesota. I called him up at home, and I said, "Bill, you got to get over here right away. This field is a mud quagmire. They forgot to shut the fountain off." Well, I didn't see him for another hour, but he did come over. He looked around, and they finally got the water shut off. But by then, there was a river on the track outside this field. And Bo gets in at 11 o'clock, gets off the bus. I said, "Hey, Bo, we got a little problem here." "Falk, what are you talking about? There's a problem." I said, "Come here with me, please." So we started walking on the field, and he had his dress shoes on. He took his pants legs, and he stepped on the field and lifted them up, and his foot sank in the ground about 2 inches from mud. Bo looked at me and says, "Falk, we're in trouble here today. We are in deep trouble." And that afternoon, of course, we didn't score a touchdown. Every time we went to the outside, Rick Leach or Butch Woolfolk had not Harlan Huckabee and those guys. That's who it was. Goes off the field and Leach. And every time they turned the corner, they would slip out. So with about a minute and a half left in the game, you talk about the enthusiasm of this jug and how you think that it got lost in the 70s. There was a fellow there about 75, 77 years old. And from my point of view now, was a really young guy. But anyway, he kept yelling at me, "Give it up, Michigan. You lost that jug today. Give it up, give it up, give it up." And when that game was over, he looked at me and he smiled and he laughed. And all those players from Minnesota came over. They grabbed that Little Brown Jug and they were gone. And I want you to know that is one of the most sinking feelings that you will ever see when you see Minnesota coming across that field to take that Little Brown Jug. And it just so happened, which was really neat for me, I packed everything up on the plane to fly back to Ann Arbor, and guess there was only one seat left on the plane when I got up. Guess who it was next to? Bo Schembechler.
Oh.
And he looked at me and he says, "Falk, your shoes didn't hold up today, did they?" And I said, Bo, I said, I did everything I could on those shoes. I cleaned them up. I kept it clean. He looked at me and says, yeah, fuck, it wasn't your shoes. We just didn't play good today. We just didn't play good. But he said, that'll never happen again. Mm-hmm. And that game lives in the back of my mind every time I see a rain game, every time I see anything that has to do with shoes. I think back to 1977 and that Minnesota game at Minnesota. It was heartbreaking.
The fans got there. They're playing outside back then, obviously. No Metrodome at that time.
No. Memorial Stadium.
Yeah.
And then if you want me to, I don't know if I can tell you the 1986 game. You brought that game up too, John. Mm. So here was the deal. The week of the Minnesota game, Bo Schembechler was going to break the record for most wins as a football coach at Michigan. Well, Jim Harbaugh was the quarterback for Michigan then. He called me and he says, hey, Big John, I want to get a plaque to give to Bo at the end of the game here. So he collected money from the team. He collected $350 for me to go out and get a nice plaque. And I did too. How stupid was I? I put on there the date, Michigan, Minnesota. Bo Schembechler breaks the record for most wins at University of Michigan. I had that plaque all ready to go. And of course, if you recall, Ricky Foggy was the quarterback, and he ran down there at the end with hardly any time left, and they kicked a field goal, and they beat us 20-17. So the next week, of course, we had to play Ohio State at Ohio State, or at home. No, at Ohio State. I'm sorry.
That's right.
So we played at. Yeah, I'm sorry, John. So I went in the locker room on Monday. I said, look, Jim, people think this is going to be a big game between Michigan and Ohio State. No, it's not. It cost me $200 more to get that plaque changed. I said, we got to win this game to give that plaque to Bo.
Well, I can
go ahead.
It bakes. I was going to ask you. Well, you did the book with Bo. I mean, Bo had to be talking about that game and the two losses. He probably remembered the losses more than he did the wins.
He remembered the losses more than 10 wins. Sad to say, and Fall can back me on that one. And hell, Bruce, you already know that, don't you?
Yep.
These guys all remember the losses. Sad to say. So the rain game, the sprinkler game, Falk already addressed perfectly. 86, of course, the plaque. Good little story there. A little addendum to that story. After the game, the plaque was under Jamie Morris's feet. The guy next to him says, hide the damn plaque.
Well, you know, I'll tell you another
if Bo sees that, he'll blow 2 gaskets.
Oh, man. I'll tell you another great story. It was the 1987 game the next year at Minnesota.
Right.
And we're standing there, and they had a tailback by the name of Daryl Thompson.
Great guy.
We had Minnesota pinned down at the 2-yard line. And next thing you know, he broke out on the right side, and he outran everybody on the team. So Bo and I were standing on the sidelines there, and as Daryl Thompson started to run by us, I lifted up my right leg like I was going to trip him because there was nobody left to touch Daryl Thompson. And Bo looked over and put his hand on my shoulder and said, Falk, I want to do that too. You got to let him go. and he ran 98 yards for a touchdown.
Another fun fact about that game. So the Monday press conference after that Minnesota game, the one John was talking about before, Michigan, I think, was number 2 in the country at that point. They're undefeated. And everyone's thinking this is the year that Bo wins his national title. He's got Harbaugh quarterback, a loaded squad, to say the least, all looking pretty good. And, of course, they lose that game with Ricky Foggy. So that Monday, Jack Harbaugh, Jim's dad, is at Western Michigan. And as Jack Harbaugh told me, a great little line. He said the AD brings him into Western Michigan and says, Jack, we're going to go in a different direction. And Jack says with great enthusiasm, oh, yeah? Which one? It's not going to involve you. And so he fired that Monday. Jim Harbaugh, like an hour later, is at a press conference, and someone asked him about the next game. And he was not coming out to make a guarantee, but kind of got cornered into it. And he finally said, hey, we're going to beat the Buckeyes, I guarantee, and win the Big Ten title. I guarantee it. So that's the guarantee game, all because of the Minnesota game. So in one day, as Jack Harbaugh told me, Bo Schembechler is on national media defending his quarterback and his old coach, Jack Harbaugh. 2 Harbaughs in trouble at once, and Bo's got to defend them both. So of course they won that Ohio State game. But that one,
I'll add a little bit to that. When Jim made that comment and the guarantee to beat Ohio State, we were at Weber's Inn, and I figured, I better tell Bo that what he said prior to going in. And I figured I was going to tell Bo and he'd explode. And I told Bo what Rick said, and he said, so he said that, are you sure? I go, oh, yeah, I'm sure, and you're going to get the question. He goes, okay. He never exploded. He was very calm about the entire piece. And, I mean, we were sitting in literally the bowels of Weber's Inn at that time, and very calm, and he just was – he knew how to protect and how to go with his players. And John saw that many, many times, didn't you, John Falk? How he just supported.
Well, yeah, in fact, I can contribute to that story too. Monday in the locker room, I went in to see Bo and I said, hey, Bo, I see Jimmy guarantee we're going to beat Ohio State. He looked at me and he says, that's my boy, Falk. That's my boy. And that's how he felt about Jim Harbaugh. That's how we all feel about Jim Harbaugh.
Well, let's get back to the Little Brown Jug, because we're in the 1980s right now.
Okay.
John, I know this is going to be John Fox. You and I have been talking about this for a long time. I know we missed the decade from the zeros to the 10. You and I still think we're in the 80s and 90s, and most of the time.
Yeah, but those were good years.
Those were great years. Yeah, we'll go back on that. So when you take a look at it, and Greg, I got to talk to you about one piece a little bit later in the 2000s. But when you talk about it, there were some fantastic games. How about Elvis Gerbach's comeback that year down at Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, we played some darn good games in Minnesota all the way through. But the one that sticks out, the 90s kind of was a blend through there. But the one there's two games that really stick out. Well, three. But the one that really got it was the 2003 game, Bruce. We're at Minnesota, and we're just playing not real well at all. And at the half, it was 14-0, Minnesota. Coming in that locker room at the halftime, Lloyd Carr, I never saw a guy have a halftime talk like Lloyd Carr did. He went out there, and he jumped up and down. He looked around and said, I want you men to know, I'm not going to let you lose this game today. I am not going to let you lose this game today. You'll have to go over my body, but we will not let us lose this game today. We are not going to do this. So we go back out, and it's 28-7 Minnesota going into the fourth quarter. And I'm thinking to myself, whoo, if we're going to come back and win this game, we might lose this game. And the next thing you know, it was 28-14. Then the next thing you know, it was 38-35 Michigan, and one great comeback game. And after the game, Lloyd, I never saw Lloyd so happy, and the players were all hugging Lloyd, hugging the players, and it was just a fun thing to see. And then the 2004 game, we were down again, 24-20 with 3 minutes left in the game. And we got the ball, and we drove 87 yards, and we ended up winning 27-24 in another great game. Now, Glenn Mason was the football coach at Minnesota, and he was a friend of mine.
He's a good man. He's a
daggone good man.
Yeah.
So they come back in 2005. Well, I always gave Glenn Mason a cup of coffee before every game, before we played him. I walked over to the locker room, and Mace looks at me and says, hey, John, is there really a Little Brown Jug? We haven't seen it here for 16 years. He said, I think it's a myth. I don't think there's such a thing as a Little Brown Jug. And I said, Mace, there is a Little Brown Jug, and I've got it. He said, I don't believe you. I've never seen it, so I don't know, and nobody in Minnesota knows for the last 16 years. Well, lo and behold, they came back, and they beat us that game 20-17 on a field goal with like seconds left. The clock didn't work. No idea how time was left. And this kid broke out and ran out and put him in field position, and they kicked the field goal, and they beat us. So after the game, I went in to see Mace, and I said, hey, Mace, you've had 2 tough games in a row with us, and you deserve to win. Congratulations. You've beaten Ohio State, and now you've beaten Michigan. He looked at me, and he says, thanks, John. I really appreciate that. I said, now, Mace, here's the deal. Don't break it. Don't lose it. Take care of it, because next year we're coming back and we're going to get it. So Mace continues to tell the story later on, is that when they got on the plane to go back to Minnesota, the empty seat sitting next to him, he put that Little Brown Jug. And he carried it with him on the plane back to Minnesota. Well, his wife met him at the airport, so they went over to Manny's Steakhouse. His wife says, "What are we going to do with the Little Brown Jug? Keep it in the back seat of the car?" He said, "Are you kidding me? Did something happen to the Little Brown Jug? I got to see John Falk's face, and that's the last thing I want to see." So he took the Little Brown Jug with him into the restaurant. Before he knew it, he tells me the story. He says there were 200 people lined up to just take a look at the Little Brown Jug in Manny's Steakhouse in Minnesota. So that just goes to show you how important the Little Brown Jug means to both Minnesota and Michigan. And then,
John, add to the story about what happened on that Monday when they put the jug out for the fans to see.
Well, go ahead and finish that, Bruce.
Okay, because what they did was they took the jug and they wanted the fans to see it, so they put it in the football building. And there were lines all the way around the football building for most of the day for people just to come in to see it. They hadn't seen it much. They hadn't won much, and it was very important to them.
No question.
That had to make it much more important to us, didn't it?
Well, so here's what happened. In 2006, Lloyd called me in, and he says, "John, we're going to Minnesota this weekend, and here's what I want to do. When that game's over, we're going to lock arms with everybody on the team. We're going to walk across the field, arm in arm, and I want you in the middle with me. And when we get over there to their bench, I want you to go over and get that Little Brown Jug and take it off their sidelines." What a proud moment that was for me, to walk across the field, elbow to elbow with every Michigan football player. And we walked over there, and it was sitting on a table, and I walked up and I grabbed it, and I picked it up, and I gave it to our captains. That was one of the proudest moments I've ever had with the Little Brown Jug. And another great story is that
Tell you what, hang on, Falk, because
Yeah.
I think that's the moment, in my opinion, that the modern rivalry, the modern Brown Jug history starts. Because that's when, before that, man, you know the drill. You're in charge of it. Michigan would win almost every year. I mean, 37 out of 41 times Michigan wins. So what would happen? You have the thing in the case on the sidelines. You pull it out, you put it on the table, and no one even touched the thing like it was, bad lunch meat. It was just left there. No one touched it. No one cared about it. And Michigan just runs off the field, and you pack it back in the box. You wheel it back, and so what? No big deal. After that game, man, Michigan now goes across the field and gets that jug, and they hoist it high. And it happened again, of course, in 2008 when the 2-7 Michigan team goes up there with Nick Sheridan at quarterback. You know that story.
Oh, yeah. They had a nice club.
That's mattering to both teams a lot.
Yes, it did. I agree with you, John. And the next time that was big was after I retired at the end of the 13th season. I set out the 14th season, and they lost that jug that year.
Mhm.
I had no fingerprints on that, just so you know. I wasn't around.
Well, hey, Falk, if I may, so I read a lot about that game. That was the concussion game, of course. That was Shane Morris. And that was one of the most eventful, I would say, games in the history of Michigan football. If they're writing about this 100 years from now, that game will be on a short list of games you got to write about to figure out what happened and what happened next. Because that, if it didn't cost Dave Brandon his job, it came very close. Brady Hoke is now very much in the hot seat, and things go downhill from that point forward. It was that week, by the way, that some publisher in New York asked me if I wanted to write a book about Michigan football, about what was happening. I said, not only do I not want to write it, I wouldn't want to read it.
Well, I tell you,
everyone's miserable. I said, no, the off the field stuff, which is more compelling perhaps. But that 2014 game was definitely a low moment for Michigan, followed by 2015 with Harbaugh back and you're back.
Yeah.
That was a big game because 2 weeks before, the bye week in the middle, Michigan loses that crazy punt game to Michigan State. To this day, I think it's second only to the band play, Stanford and Cal Berkeley. This crazy game, and you got 2 weeks to wait if we can play again. And the team kept his head together. Harbaugh kept them together. I think a very admirable job. But you go up to Minnesota, and you really can't lose twice in a row to maintain your momentum. So,
Well,
Paul?
the thing that was interesting about the 2015 game is that Jimmy called me and he said, "Hey, John, I want you to fly with us to Minnesota this year." And I wasn't working for the team at the time, but I had helped Jimmy, volunteered to help him. He asked me to fly with him to Minnesota. He said, "I want you to be there for that jug." And I want you to know that was the first time in my life that I never had to worry about anything. I just waited. We held them on the goal line for two straight shots. In fact, they could have gone for a field goal to tie the game, but instead they elected to go for it and for the win. And we stopped them and won the game 29-26. And I'll be darned, I was the first one on the field. And I ran over there and got that jug and I gave it to our players. And that was really the first time that I really enjoyed it, because most of the time you got a lot of things on your mind. How you going to get the jug? What are you going to do? But this time I said, I'm going to have fun at this. And I did. And I was really thankful for Jim Harbaugh for having me come back to help get the jug in 2015.
So all the time, Johnny, you won the jug. It was business as usual. 2015 is the first time you really get a chance in all those years, 45 years or so, to savor it. Is that accurate?
That's exactly right. That is exactly right, because I had nothing to worry about other than not falling down when I had that jug in my hand. And that can happen sometimes too.
So let's talk a couple about smaller stories about the jug. And I think, John, the jug has never really been shown a lot at Michigan. Tell people where the jug has survived most of the years.
Well, we had a replica out in the museum.
Right.
And we kept the real jug during those early years, and really till Jim got here. I kept it in the equipment room, locked up under lock and key, so nobody could get it. Because, to be very honest with you, I never wanted anybody to lose that jug under my watch. Somebody else, that's okay. But for me, I didn't want my name attached to the fact that someone had taken the Little Brown Jug. So I kept it in the equipment room and I locked it up. Now, when Jim got here, he's built a trophy case now for both Paul Bunyan and the Little Brown Jug to share each other in there. And excuse me, and that really makes it nice now, because the players can see those two trophies every day when they go to the locker room.
Johnny, only if you win them.
There's been a blank spot there sometimes for there's been more of a blank spot for that Paul Bunyan trophy than for the Little Brown Jug. I got to be honest with you, but both of them hurt when you lose them, and both of them are great when you win them. And just want people to know that the Little Brown Jug means a lot to both Michigan and Minnesota. I guarantee you this: their team's talking about it next week. They'll be talking about the Little Brown Jug.
John, Greg, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to add, it was really that in my research that when the jug was stolen in 1931, that's what really started both teams, and it reappeared, where both teams had a replica, and they built a case in the 30s to keep it in. It's still the same case that we keep it today.
Oh, and, yeah, I was going to say, even now, and I'll tell you this, when I came here, Bo told me, he said, I don't want to see the Little Brown Jug on the sidelines until the game is over. Because he said, here's the problem, Falk. Everybody wants to see that Little Brown Jug. He said, and it takes it away from the ball game. So you go over there and keep it in a trunk in its own case, and with about a minute and a half left in the game, you reach down and you get it, but you don't show it until the game's over. And I didn't realize that until the first time we played in Minnesota, and all of a sudden, they all watched me. The TV cameras walked over, and there I was getting down there and they knew what I was doing. And man, that was a big deal for everybody on TV, everybody in the stands. In fact, the one year Minnesota came to town and somebody said, hey, can I get a picture of Little Brown Jug? I said, if you want a picture of him, you're going to have to win it, because it's under lock and key right now.
Well, one thing about the jug, Bakes, you were saying how that's never been broken and all that stuff. It's one thing going on. But Greg, the biggest problem with the jug is what part of the jug? How do you have to hold that jug properly?
Well, I recommend, based on the Ryan Forey, the master potter at the Henry Ford's advice, either with two hands like this, right? Or gently hold the handle. Don't jack the handle. Don't hold it. It's strong. It can be held like that. You'll see it. It has been over the years. but always two hands so as to not put too much pressure.
Chase Winovich. We're going to talk about that. Let's say how that one went. Because Chase Winovich, I was teaching your class, Bakes, when you were doing. I was teaching your class, and I brought Greg Dooley in, and Greg specifically talked about the handle, right, Greg?
Yeah,
you did,
because there were some athletes in this class.
Chase was one of them.
I specifically said, if any of you happen to be handling this thing, use two hands. And I swear, if he didn't just do it to get me, because I think he did like a loaf of bread. It was nuts.
It's funny. It's funny you say that. Oh, go ahead, John.
Marty, you're not off the hook here, pal. I got the photo on Facebook of the brown jug in the passenger seat. Now, I grant you have it with the seatbelt around it. But what the hell are you thinking? Falk, correct this man. It's got to go in the case, Bruce. It's got to go in the case.
Well, wait a minute.
One accident, one fender bender. What happens next? And then your name is attached to it. You want to live forever, Bruce? You want a legacy?
I feel like I might get a phone call if that happened, by the way.
By the way, just remember this. I'm going to ask Falk, how heavy was the case?
The case was heavier than the jug, I'll be honest.
Oh, a lot heavier. I mean, I couldn't lift it. I had to take it for a TV interview, so to speak, at least a TV shot, let's say. And and there's no way. And all I remember, I said, Falk, I'll take care of it. I'll do it. I handled it very nicely, strapped it in. And when I strapped it in, I said, I'm going to take a picture because there's very few times that you can take a legend and put a legend in the car and have a ride with it. And the legend doesn't say anything back to you, but you know it's important. It's very important.
I was going to say, I was going to say that, did you see the little cork on top there on top of the jug? I always told people don't ever remove that cork because that's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. We have no idea what's inside it.
All right.
That's right.
My question, Dooley or Falk, maybe Bruce. One of you guys can answer this one. When Mason took the jug to the steakhouse, I had heard that they took the cork off and they're filling it with God knows what and drinking out of it, which, by the way, I'm all for the jug. I'm all for all kinds of crazy stuff. There's no way in hell I'm ever drinking whatever the hell is down at the bottom of that thing. Did they actually jug that night?
Today.
Yeah, I always check that cork, and it has not been removed. That was a Glenn Mason story.
Yeah. In fact, there's a screw in the top of it. I have a picture on it, make sure. But
and they used to have a little in the top of the cork. It used to be a little block M and then a line and a Minnesota M, but we lost that a few years ago, and I don't know where that went. But that afterwards, like you said, Bruce, with all the people that touched it, every team, and I got a letter one day from a guy who was a pottery expert, and he wrote me a 2-page letter on just what Greg was talking about, how to hold the jug, how not to hold it by the handle, and how the handle is the most fragilest part of the jug. Please be careful. I wrote him back and said, thank you, sir, for your advice, and I will follow it. I followed it, but I can't guarantee you the teams did when they took it away.
Tell you what,
I've seen footage
when they're slugging that thing around. It scares me a lot.
Oh yeah, it scares me every time. I don't know, Bruce, did you notice on the inside of that case, it's purple velvet?
Yes, it is.
It's about 3 or 4 inches thick of purple velvet padding that protects that little brown jug. It's got to be one of the most protected little brown jugs in the country.
I will say this. I don't think the Stanley Cup is protected that well.
No, not at all.
Not even close.
It could go over Niagara Falls in that case.
But the other thing is that when a few years back, we had the sides where it has the scores on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I have Jill Gordon, who lives in town there. She's an artist, and she paints those scores every year on that jug when Michigan wins it. And we had a big decision to make on where to put the white stripe for the rest of the scores because we ran out of spaces on all the sides. So we put the white stripe on the on top of the Michigan block M where we could put the scores, and then it'll go below. I think this is the last year on there, that space on top of the block M for Michigan. So the next time, in the next winter, we'll have to decide whether they want to put the score on the bottom of that block M, or if Minnesota, if they would win, they'd want to put it over on the Minnesota side. I don't know. But since we won, it went on the Michigan side.
I think that was 2013, which you guys did mention. But for me, having the jug to be able to make that decision was a big deal. So I'm glad that John and Jill were able to make that choice. Yeah.
So as we're about ready to finish off the evening here and the stories about the Little Brown Jug, I want to finish it off by letting everybody have one last say about it. I'll start with Greg. Greg, just when you're going to watch the game and you see the Little Brown Jug, what goes through your mind? Because you know the history, but now all of a sudden it's today. What does go through your mind when you see this game and you'll see the jug at the end of the game?
Look, we have all these wonderful stories. We have John Falk's stories. We have John Bacon. We have, other history stories. I write history. This is a tangible piece of some of the greatest Michigan and Big Ten football teams in one of the greatest games that is sitting there. It's a tangible piece. People collect memorabilia. This is the greatest piece of college football, really football memorabilia that's ever been conceived. And that's what I think about. I think about the history. It's there. They drank out of that jug in 1903, right? That's what I think about.
Bakes, what are you going to think about?
That's hard to top right there. But yes, Willie Heston, arguably the greatest player ever. Guys like that drank from that jug. And what's amazing to me about this thing is that it's truly living history. How many things that are 120, 117 years old are you allowed to touch? So this thing is alive, and it matters to the players now every bit as much as it mattered 110 years ago. And how many things can you say that about? That to me, it's the extension 5-6 generations of passion for this one object. This object takes on a life of its own, of course. One more little thing: there is footage of Bo Schembechler, as you know, Bruce, and you know, John, probably Greg too. Him tossing it up in the air and catching it, and tossing it up in the air and catching it. Like, damn it, Bo, you're an offensive lineman. Your hands aren't that.
Yeah. And I'm going to let John Falk finish it off because, really, we talk about the jug, but nobody has been closer to the jug for a longer period of time than John Falk. And that jug has to mean something to you, John, even though you and I will not be at the game against Minnesota. But when you see that end of the game in the jug, what are you going to be watching for? What is going to go through your mind?
Well, hopefully I want to see the captains take the jug. And I want to see all the seniors circle the captains as they run all across the field and carry that jug around. And when you look back through the years, I think I checked my record and I was 35 wins and 3 losses for the times that I've handled a Little Brown Jug. And like you said, Bo always talked about the losses, but there were a lot of great wins there too. There were a lot of great football players. And I think about the energy that it takes for both teams. When those Minnesota guys go up that tunnel and they lost, they feel bad. And when Michigan, they felt bad. And that's what I think about is how great a feeling it is to win that Little Brown Jug and run in that locker room after the game. And guess what you get to sing at the end of the game in Michigan? Hail to the victors. Yep. Hail to the victors.
I'm going to say this, and I'll finish it off in this way. I think it's one of the great things about being part of the University of Michigan. As a player, as an administrator, as a fan, an alum, you have, and we all have, that great tradition. And I think the Little Brown Jug is probably the emblematic piece of that great tradition in sports for our athletic department. And just to see it, I think, means so much. So when everybody's watching that game on Saturday night and they see that Minnesota-Michigan game, and you hopefully you'll see us walk off the field or run off the field with that trophy, realize it's not just those players that won it. They've won it for the players back in 2003. They've won it for the fans. They've won it for everyone. It's part of the Michigan tradition. It's part of what we love about the University of Michigan. I want to thank Greg Dooley. I want to thank John Bacon. And I want to thank John Falk. All three of these gentlemen are good friends, great Michigan guys. John's a little bit more objective. He better be because he's a journalist. Greg's a great historian. And John Falk, let me tell you, he's got more stories to tell than anybody else that I know. I want to thank everybody, and especially the University of Michigan Alumni Association, for allowing us to talk about the Little Brown Jug and have this discussion tonight. And it was an excellent way to kick off the 2020 football season. for all of us, everybody, good night and go blue.
Go blue.